On behalf of all the seniors, I wish to extend a most sincere and cordial welcome to each of you here tonight. In a short while, we 71 seniors will walk before you and receive our diplomas, signifying that we have successfully completed 12 years of education. This is one of the greatest moments of our lives, and it will long be remembered as we go out into the world and begin our new careers. Each of us has a different idea as to what that career may be. Some of us will get a job and enter the business world immediately. Others will get married and raise a family. Still others will go on to higher education at a college or a university. But no matter what the future may hold, we have one thing in common. We could never have made it this far without your help. Without the love and sacrifices of our parents, our education could not even have begun. Without the careful training and the wise advice of our teachers and counselors, our school years would have been wasted. And without the support and backing of the entire community, our lives would hold no purpose. Together you have supplied your energy and talents to mold this raw material, we seniors, into living beings. You have helped us to develop our minds as well as our bodies to their greatest capacity. With your hammer of wisdom and your chisel of fortitude, you have helped to remove the rough edges and to bring forth the qualities that were hidden deep beneath the surface. But even with these qualities evident, we realize that we are far from the finished product. We need to be polished so that our flaws and our faults can be removed. We're like a piece of furniture that has been made and polished and tagged and now sits in the store window waiting to be purchased and used. No piece of furniture was ever made just to be looked at. Each one has a purpose. In the same manner, each one of us has or will have a purpose, and you are the ones who have made it possible to be alive, a part of the world, and a graduate here tonight. In closing, I leave this parting thought in the mind of each senior. I get discouraged now and then when there are clouds of gray, until I think about the things that happened yesterday. I do not mean the day before or those of months ago, but all the yesterdays in which I had a chance to grow. I think of opportunities that I allowed to die, and those I took advantage of before they passed me by. And I remember that the past presented quite a plight, but somehow I endured it, and the future seemed all right. And I remind myself that I am capable and free, and my success and happiness are really up to me. Thank you.
Thank you. Now to introduce our main speaker, Mr. Yuri Arnold, the Superintendent of Schools.
I'm very pleased and proud to present you Dr. David McKenna.
Thank you, Mr. Arnold. Distinguished platform guests, members of the Board of Education, faculty, the class of 1968, parents, and friends. The introduction opened one opportunity for a personal comment and that is the silly old father would like to show you the pictures of our 2-year-old son. We finished off the family, having begun with the son, 2 daughters, and then we have just Robert Bruce, who's 2 weeks old. So it's a perfect family to clear the record here. The address that I want to present to the senior class of Richmond High School for 1968 tonight was prepared last Thursday when you and I were both in the midst of the turmoil of national disaster, as well as the heat of a premature June summer. And so I prepared this with 2 thoughts in mind. One is that tonight might be 90 degrees in here, and the second with an adage which I understand is very appropriate for public speakers. They say that when the U.S. Senate invites a minister to come to the Senate and give the invocation before the opening of Congress, they will write a very dignified letter inviting him with all the necessary formality and protocol of governmental circles. But then the last sentence of the letter, after all the formality, will say this: if you want to be popular, be brief. And I have these 2 thoughts in mind tonight as I want to speak to this senior class on the topic, observations on the American scene. I think that the members of this class realize very forcefully that you have lived in your senior year at one of the watersheds of American history. During this past year, in your senior year, you have watched the wheel of revolution move one full cycle into an age of violence that President Johnson said just last week now was threatening to tear apart the fabric of our society. As you think back on your senior year, you will remember that you entered that year in the wake of the riots that burned our cities in that long, hot summer of 1967. You'll probably also remember the momentary relief that came to the age of violence when our attention was drawn to the hippies, who preferred to make love to war, and they preferred flowers to guns. But evidently, because that was only temporary attention, the world wasn't quite ready to go with the hippies and turn on and tune in and drop out. Because you also remember the fall not only for the hippies, but for the fact that this was when the student protests began and the march was made on the Pentagon against the Vietnam War. You remember the stories and the scenes of the young student who made himself a flaming torch on the mall of the Pentagon? And can you still see back in last fall when the federal troops came and bodily removed the protesters from the steps of the Pentagon? And then it seemed as if the storm broke. During the last 6 months of your senior year, almost every city and town in the United States has been touched by the mounting death toll in Vietnam. Just last month, you and I were witnesses to what I'm sure will someday be called the French Revolution of 1968. We have seen some of the leading universities of our country brought to a grinding halt by student rebellion. And then, as if this were not enough for us to absorb as a nation, you and I have been also witnesses to the double shock of seeing 2 of our national leaders brutally removed from the national scene by assassins' bullets. And because the common question among our people tonight is this: how many times have you heard it? What's happened to America? I think that the joy of this commencement season must be tempered with some serious thought. As I have looked back upon this year, and as I come to you tonight, I realize that humor seems out of place. And I think I know you well enough to know that you are not going to entertain pious platitudes from this commencement rostrum. And therefore, I've chosen to make some observations on the American scene. I'm going to speak to you as a citizen, not as an expert with the answers, but as a person like you who is concerned that I will not see in my generation the death of a democracy. And so to you, the graduates of the class of 1968, I'm going to tell it like it is, because I think that's just the way that you would want it. My first observation is that the violence of 1968 is different than the violence of the American past. Scholars are now telling us that America has always been a nation of violence, and they point back to the fact that our nation was born in violence, and we've been a people that have had a war in almost every generation. Furthermore, we have on our history, our national history, that inglorious blotch of having participated in the bloodiest civil war in the history of man. And you don't have to look just today to see violence, but you can go back to 1860 during the Civil War, when the draft riots were held in the city of New York, and the end result in the 1860s was that 1,000 people lay dead on the streets of New York as they rebelled against going to the military through the draft. Then if you look later in the century, as the Industrial Revolution hit America and the labor movement began to rise, we entered the era of the labor riots, when labor and management clashed head on, and their violence was marked by destruction and death. I remember, just as a very young boy, my mother's fears, which I shared with her in 1937 when my dad was called up in the National Guard to go up to Flint, Michigan, and to quell riots that were being held in that city at that time. But violence today, I think, has taken on some new dimensions. I think violence is different in 1968 than it is in the American past, because violence now seems to be an expression of a state of mind rather than an instrument to achieve a goal. And if this is the case, I think that the change took place when John F. Kennedy was assassinated in 1963. You were just 8th graders then, or just about ready to enter high school. But if you remember that time, were comfortably fixed in the idea that it just can't happen here. Someone said we had a circle of sanity, and within that circle of sanity we made room for the probables of accidents, of national disaster, and even death. But outside the range of that circle of sanity, we just could not believe that we, as the most advanced civilization of the world, could ever go beyond the probable into that improbable world, beyond the boundary line of our circle of sanity, into the assassination of a national leader. And I think that's why Norman Cousins, writing in Saturday Review after John F. Kennedy's death, said that with the violent death of John F. Kennedy, he said the outer circle of the improbable was violently punctured and the minds of Americans went blank. You see what happened at that time. The truth is, we were not accustomed to this form of hate. And we were mad while we mourned. And our minds were blank. We didn't know how to comprehend it at the same time that our eyes were filled. I've read some of the reports of psychiatrists who have tried to look at the collective mind of America after the death of President Kennedy, and they tell us that the sanity of the nation was almost lost. But we know that whereas the national equilibrium may have been badly bent in 1963, it wasn't broken. And so what we did evidently was to take this circle of sanity and expand it to make room for some new forms of hate and new forms of violence. And when we expanded this circle of sanity, there were extremists on the right and on the left. There were members of the lunatic fringe who then began to see violence as a way to express a state of mind, as well as perhaps incidentally or hopefully to get some things done. So my second observation is this. Violence now could become a way of life with us. Have you ever thought, for the first time in our history, America has been involved in 3 major wars, one undeclared, of course, within little more than a generation. And when I look at a class of 1968 and at you men, I have to realize with you that the young man who is not acquainted with violence through military action sometime in your lifetime will probably be an exceptional member of this class. And furthermore, Clark Kerr, who was formerly the president of the University of California, has said, we're just now beginning to reap the values that were created in the minds of a generation who were suckled at the breast of TV and nursed under the sign of the bomb. When we talk about my family, I have a 7-year-old girl, and she was first introduced to violence about 3 or 4 years ago, and she's just a very young child, and of course had the advantage or the disadvantage of the television set, and she saw in the news report the Negroes as they came up to the bridge at Selma, Alabama, in their march on Selma, and were beaten back from that bridge with clubs. And I can remember her turning to her mother in the news report on the Day Show that morning and said, "Mama, why do they want to hurt those people?" Just last week, Sue, who was a product of the television generation, got up on Wednesday morning, and my wife asked her, she's 7 years old now in the 2nd grade, she said, "Sue, do you know Bobby Kennedy?" And she, as a product of the television generation, said, "Yes." Then Wednesday morning, she sat with her parents before she went to school, and we watched again the scenes of the shooting. And we realized, as I sat with her and I tried to absorb the shock, that she now had the disadvantage of seeing all the violence and even the blood in full color. And in that moment, I had to ask myself as a parent, what is going to be the effect upon a child who's going to have a daily diet of violence, both from Walt Disney and from David Brinkley and from Hugh Downs? Well, I think I know the answer. It is possible that violence could become a way of life with us, and it might even become an end in itself. And I think we've seen some predictions of this, evidence of this prediction coming true. You remember when the students at Columbia rioted and they went into the president's office and sat there for several days and messed it all up? And after then, the university made adjustments to the student rebellion. They set up a committee of trustees and of faculty and the student rebels. And they said, "We want you on this committee to help reform Columbia University." When they did this, the leader of the student rebellion went out to the square and found a soapbox and stood up and said, "We've got our enemy with his back to the wall. We don't want to reform the university. We want to close it." You see, violence, in a sense, was becoming an end in itself. Or did you read in Newsweek magazine, after the Martin Luther King death, there was a young Negro boy who was running down the streets of Washington while it was burning. He had been in a hardware store, and he had under his arm, and in his hand here, this portable television set. And as he was running down the street with the stolen goods, a reporter said to him, "Son, why are you stealing that television set?" The boy stopped momentarily, then sped on, but flung back over his shoulder these words. He said, "Because they killed what's-his-name." You see, violence had become a lark, or even an end in itself. And I say that when violence becomes a way of life with us, or an end in itself, then we're in danger of anarchy ruling our nation. And therefore, my third observation is this, that anarchy, if it comes through violence, will lead us to a Caesar. Have you ever thought, as you've considered in your government courses in your senior year, that democracy is the most delicate political system that any people could ever choose? The best you can say about democracy is that it's an experiment in every generation, because it puts the sovereignty in the hands of the majority of the people. But there's always the tendency on one side for people to want the security for life, even though it means that power will be centralized in the hands of a king or of a central government or of a dictator. And on the other hand, democracy is always under the threat, those who want their complete freedom without any controls whatsoever. I remember the saying that came out of the younger generation when they said, "We want to do our own thing and we want to do it now." I read in the paper last week of the MSU students who rebelled against the university and against the university bringing in police interference from the local forces to break up a pot party on campus. They objected because they wanted no limits whatsoever on their individual freedom. But I want to remind you tonight that anarchy is always just a dream of desperate romantics. Anarchy is like a snake that goes around and devours its own tail. Because once an anarchist gets his way, he's got to organize. And once he organizes, he's no longer an anarchist. So consequently, the students take over a university, and when they get it, they don't know what to do with it. And anarchy frequently then results in the pendulum swinging back from one side to the other, whereby the strong arm of government steps in, and the prediction has been made that America could be in danger of having a Caesar. Evidence for this came from Alexis de Tocqueville, who wrote a book in 1899. He was a Frenchman who visited America, and he looked over the American scene, and he wrote this book called Democracy in America. And he said this: when Americans lose their republican institutions, that's with a small r, of course, said they will speedily arrive at a despotic government. And I think we saw a hint of this attitude or this state of mind during President Johnson's State of the Union address in January. Remember, when he talked about his solutions and his proposals for the domestic problems of the state, such as population control and poverty and pollution, he got only polite applause from Congress. But then when he said, I will do whatever is necessary to maintain law and order in our streets, the halls of Congress rang with spontaneous and enthusiastic applause. And it seemed to be expressing a state of mind of Americans that we're ready to pay any price to curb the threat of violence in our nation. And so we're caught on this delicate dilemma and on this pendulum. And we have to ask ourselves, do we have any alternatives to anarchy in one hand or a police state and a Caesar on the other? My third or fourth and final observation is that we do. But I think it depends primarily upon the youth here who are soon going to be stepping into the world stage of action. I don't know if you read in Time magazine just this past week as they showed the college graduate of 1968 on the cover. In that article, they made the prediction that the college class of 1968 will be the last college class that will rebel according to the system rather than against the system. And they made the prediction that if, for instance, if you're going on to college and you'll become a member of the college class of 1972, the prediction is made that you will make the student revolt of 1972 or make the student revolt of today in 1972 look just about as innocent as the tale of Mary Poppins. If this is the case, I predict, and that you choose this course, I think we're both going to know what it is to live under the strong arm and the mailed fist of a despot. And thus, I call the class of 1968, the graduates of Richmond High School, to the task of renewing the critical values of your heritage rather than destroying them. And I see your task in 3 steps. John Gardner says in his book, Self-Renewal, that renewal begins in any society when there's a confrontation between the ideal and the real. Now, youth usually represent the ideal, and adults usually represent the real. And so we have a generation gap. Someone said there's no longer just one generation between father and son, but it's 400 years. And sometimes when we try to keep up with the language, we know what that means. But nevertheless, the generation gap is with us. It's a confrontation between the real and the ideal. That's the first step in renewing any society. But may I say tonight, we've had that confrontation. I think that the youth, idealistic youth, have shown the adult world that we are hypocritical in many of our actions. I think the idealistic youth have shown us that our institutions do get stagnated, and they're encrusted with organizational barnacles that need to be cleaned off. I heard a young man who composed a poem in a coffee house recently that went like this. He said, God, I need to pray, but you're going to have to help me kneel because I don't even know where the floor is. I think that violence in our age has shown us where the floor is. I think that violence has shown us our inhumanity. Violence has shown us our injustice. Violence today has shown us the depth of our national as well as our personal sins. And I think that America, in a sense, is on the floor. And to a certain extent, the dirt is clinging to the synthetic fiber of our character. So I ask you to come to the second step with me. And that is this. We've got to begin to rebuild the great truth and the effectiveness of democracy in this generation. And this means that young people like you are going to have to be ready to participate in the great tasks and in the great problems of our time. And whether you're going out into a career from this moment or into college, you're going to have to get ready to get your hands dirty with the problems of your community. You're going to have to start thinking and speaking and acting, not with your own selfish interest in mind, but with the larger view of the future as well as with the longer view of the common good. And I predict it's going to cost you money. It's going to cost you time. It's going to cost you comfort. But that's a lot cheaper than violence. Then once we know where the floor is, and once you're ready to get into action, then we've got to turn our attention to recreating the values which support our freedom. Again, I return to John Gardner when he said, morality is not static in any generation or in any nation. He said, every generation that comes up is given some moral values, and that generation can determine whether it wants those values to decay or whether it wants to renew and restore those values. He then goes on to say that the morality of any nation is never any better than the generation that holds moral values in trust. And that's your task. Yet, as we look at history today, it appears today, when we think about moral values, as if a faith in God has given way to a cynical idealism. It appears almost as if a sense of duty has been lost in the breakdown of authority. It appears as if the respect for human rights has disappeared in a boiling pot of violence. It appears as if freedom has become license for selfish indulgence. In short, it might appear as if your generation is going to consume its moral heritage and leave little or nothing for the future. But I don't believe it. This cannot be true. I don't believe that the moral reservoir, as I know people, and you do too, who still have a firm faith in God and they're ready to act it out. There are those who realize, as Eric Severard said last Wednesday night as he commented on the death of Robert F. Kennedy, he said, there are those of us who must get the message out that duty still precedes freedom or rights in the lexicon of freedom. There are those of us who still know that freedom is not a right that you have, but you only have liberty. And liberty is nothing more than freedom mixed with responsibility. And I also want to remind you tonight that there are those who share the conviction of Robert F. Kennedy, who spoke in Lansing, Michigan, just a few days or weeks before his death, when he said in our capital city, violence will not bring us peace. Violence will not solve our problems. And so, graduates of the class of 1968, these are the truths for your life that can still make a difference in the moral order of our society. Democracy will not die if good men are ready to do something. For some of you, when you think about a personal commitment to God, when you think about a willingness to sacrifice for your fellow man, when you think about your willingness to live within the laws of the land, this may be too heavy a burden for you to bear. But for others of you, I think you will accept this burden, and you're going to realize that these are the truths that still call men and nations and graduates to greatness. And you are the ones in whom we find our hope for a violent, violent world. Congratulations, and God bless you.
duties of the high school principal is to present the graduating class to the Board of Education and to the community. But before doing so, I should like to read to the senior class a communication that was sent to the school in your name a very short time ago. To the 1968 graduating class, Richmond Community High School, let me extend to each of you the warm congratulations of a former teacher who in spirit shares your sense of achievement. You've laid a foundation for useful and satisfying lives. Before you get on with the work, I would like to offer a few thoughts that you might find useful. The passion to succeed, to achieve great things, is strongest in youth. Heed it. Do not squander your lives in petty pursuits. Commit yourselves now to a course that will strengthen you for the trials and opportunities of life. Prize your individuality always. Whatever your place in society, whatever your work, do not surrender your self-reliance or compromise your independence. Liberty is and always will be your most precious possession. Guard it well. Direct your energies, your talents, and your desires to what is best for yourselves and best for your country. We look to you to redeem what is wrong in our national past and to build what will be great in our national future. Let this be your wish, that you may look back upon this graduation from no matter how many years with the conviction that you have treated all men with honesty and goodwill, and that you have put your heart into your work, and that you have done your best. Signed, Lyndon Baines Johnson, President of the United States. And now, Dr. Gingrich, I as principal do hereby state publicly that the seniors assembled here have completed the course of study prescribed by the Board of Education for the Richmond Community High School, and in so doing, I present them to you and to the community.
On behalf of the Board of Education, I want to congratulate each one of you in the class of 1968 and wish you well as you leave Richmond Community High.
In awarding the diplomas, if you would, I will be calling each individual senior individually. May we hold our applause and give them a very large collective congratulations at the end of the presentation. Karen Mary Belk. Christine Ann Chalice. E. Christensen. Raymond J. Cook. Diane Marie Dobrook. Christine Marie Dubé. Suzanne Lynn Fissler. Nancy Lynn Heimke. Jane Hench. Betty Lou Higgins. Roberta Georgiana Landon. Marianne Pauline Lisey. Louise Marie Mackley. Elsie Marie Manchester. Michael David Maddock. Mary Don Riggs, Ann Shepard, Philip Charles Weinert,
In trying to find a basis for my topic tonight, it was difficult for me to think of anything special or different, something that's never been said before. When saying farewell to Richmond High School, one seems that it's only proper to say thank you. Thank you to Mr. Arnold and the Board of Education for the efficient operation of the school and for all those lengthened vacations and snow days. Thank you to Mr. Jakubiak, our principal, for supervising our activities and for dismissing seniors first in assemblies. Thank you to the teachers for your guidance and all the times classes were cut and transformed into study halls. Farewell also suggests a permanent departure. We, the class of 1968, would rather have it mean a goodbye to Richmond High School, but not to the friendships we have established here. These friendships, teamed with the knowledge which we have received, will be the foundation of the society of our generation. We realize that riots, bombings, and assassinations are not the right ingredients to mold this society, but the genuine concern of our generation is not recognized by a majority of the people. We are victims of an image. The habit of generalization is too widespread. After today, may each of us set out to create a distinct image of ourselves. As freshmen, we stumbled but passed, trying to learn, unable to teach. Slowly we crawled, attempting to grasp those things which today we have reached. Thank you. And now, with the members of the class of 1968, please rise and turn and present yourself to your community. Realizing our responsibilities as American citizens, we shall strive to strengthen and preserve our democracy. We shall use our knowledge and judgment to make America a worthy example for the world to follow. We shall try to be unselfish and understanding in our relationships with other men and nations. Thus, by contributing to the ideal of peace and brotherhood, may we, the class of 1968, make the best use of the training and guidance received at Richmond High School. Thank you.